Hello and welcome back to the Muscle Engineering Podcast. I am, as always, your host, Andre, and you're listening to episode 41, which is a special one. First and foremost, because it's Christmas, so Merry Christmas to all of you. And this is going to be, I guess, my Christmas gift for you. And the second reason why this is a special episode is because I finally have Eric Helms on the podcast. Now, as you will hear in the intro, Eric has been one of my earliest influences. He actually has been the second influence, if you want to be very specific, after Matt August. So he has been sort of the first person I started following from the quote-unquote evidence-based community, and through him I then start, discovering the rest of the people that you've heard on the podcast, guys like Lai McDonald or Mike or Greg Nuckols and so on and so forth. So in this episode, we cover what I consider to be the most important side of bodybuilding and just, life in general, which is the psychology of it. The rest of the details, the calories and the sets and all that stuff are honestly worthless if your mind isn't in the right spot. So we cover a lot of ground here. We covered, gym motivation, sort of why people get into lifting or why they might quit the gym, how to manage social media and this sort of a pressure that we put on ourselves to look a certain way, this, sort of keeping up with the Joneses phenomenon. And we also cover the highly sensitive but still very much relevant subject of steroids. So I think there is something here for everyone. I think there's a lot of gems to take away from this episode. It has been, like I said, one of my personal favorites. Eric has just knocked it out of the park, and it has been amazing talking to him. So enjoy episode 41 of the Muscle Engineering Podcast with Dr. Eric Helms. Eric, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
I think I always like to start off with these, especially with people who I've followed for a long time, to sort of give them my respect and give credit where credit is due. And I think I told this story somewhere, but you were basically the second person I started following, I think. So the first one was Matt August in the whole evidence-based community. I mean, I sort of came across his prep files from 2011, which I think you helped him with in 2012. And then I remember you did sort of a Q&A session, and I vividly remember you being in this white shirt and you were licking ice cream, answering questions. So I don't know if you even remember that, but that's how far back this all goes. So
that's really cool, man. Well, I'm honored to hear that. And yeah, it was pretty cool. I still remember calling Matt August in, it would have been early 2011, maybe even late 2010 before then. And just got talking to him about his needs as a bodybuilder, and then him deciding to come on as a 3DMJ athlete, and me coaching him through his 2011 season, and then the whole world of like progressive overload and energy balance was new to him and made a huge difference for him. And then he started to really carry that message on to his followers and asked me to sit down and random off-season lunches after we trained and talk about everything. So that was my first real exposure to, I guess you could call YouTube a social media platform these days. But back then I didn't even realize how big it was going to be or how big it was. So that's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, it was definitely early days, but we've come a long way since. So it's awesome to now be able to, have a sit down with you and pick your brain for an hour or so. It's awesome.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for bringing that up. It's cool to hear that.
All right, so today I want to talk about something more important than macros and calories, which is as unbelievable as that might be for some people. It's not really the most important aspect of the whole bodybuilding thing. I think the most important one is the psychology behind it and sort of, keeping our heads straight. And I think you are a very invaluable guest in that regard, because you went you went through pretty much everything. Like, you were the hardcore bodybuilder. You experienced some of the not so pleasant consequences of bodybuilding preps, which I also want to get into a bit later. So I think you can offer some very, very cool insights, of course, combined with your latest prep, which was pretty much the opposite of how some of the earlier ones went. Now, to start off, I would like to ask you, I'm sure you told this story previously, I'm sure I heard it, but I don't remember, so I will ask you, like, what was the original motivation behind getting into, bodybuilding and just lifting weights? And I guess, to sort of tie this back into a more general topic, like, what do you think, or what do you notice the general reason why people start lifting weights is, and do you think that has shifted over the years, let's say from when you started lifting to maybe more like the current era, so to speak?
So for me, it was about finding a little more control in my life. And I was towards the tail end of my Air Force enlistment. This was 2004. I got out in 2005. And I went through a pretty stressful time in my life. I was in a long distance relationship, and I didn't have the ability to travel at that time because of the specific logistics of my assignment. And there was basically some red tape that said during this period of this assignment, I couldn't take leave. And it was during a time period in that relationship where I really needed to go home, and I couldn't. And I needed some outlets for some relatively just rough stuff in my life and in the life of that relationship. And I didn't have an outlet. So fortunately, instead of turning long-term to more negative outlets, I hit up my buddy Patrick and said, "Hey man, I know you lift weights, you do the whole bodybuilding thing. Can you show me the ropes?" And I remember I was even playing with the idea of getting into boxing or something like that. So I didn't know what I wanted. I just wanted something hard, something challenging, and something that could be my thing. And I don't think I even was able to articulate it at that point. I just saw it as an outlet. And it started as a very obsessive and kind of almost masochistic kind of approach. And I liked that it was hard. I liked that it was painful because it gave me kind of that outlet. It was a catalyst for processing my emotions. I don't know how well I could have, like I said, articulated all that at the time, but the experience at the time was I needed an outlet, and I got bit by the iron bug, and there was no turning back. So that was my first exposure to it, and it changed from that over time. I think, like any relationship, whether it's with a person or a practice, your reasons and your whys will shift over time, and hopefully it's something that you realize you want to stick with, in this case being a potentially healthy behavior. So that's me. And then eventually it just became, whenever I think you mesh that experience with my personality, and my personality is one where when I find something that I enjoy, I go all in, and it becomes something I think about 24/7. I obsess about it, and if I was that way with video games, which was a problem. I was that way with pretty much anything in life that I really, really enjoyed. So it's probably no surprise now that I have my entire academic career isn't focusing on that. My actual career itself is focusing on that. As an athlete, I'm still very heavily involved, and it's also something that I think about as far as a way of finding meaning and expressing yourself in life. So anyway, that's that part of the question. The second part of the question, as to whether I think people still get into lifting for that reason, I think people still stick with lifting for the same reason. There's a reason why getting bitten by the iron bug is kind of a thing that people say. Because even if you come to it initially because you want to look better for the opposite sex, or because you have social pressure from Instagram to look better, like, that's social pressure hasn't changed in its root cause and that root feeling. It's been amplified, and the frequency of exposure has gone up on Instagram and social media, and maybe even the expectations have risen. But I don't think that's enough to sustain most people. shame and social pressure hasn't fixed the obesity epidemic yet. So I doubt it's going to make, people really stick with serious bodybuilding or weightlifting. And I think, so what initially gets you to lift weights and what makes you stay with it are two different things. Because I actually did start lifting weights. I took a weightlifting class my last year of high school, and I had a buddy in high school, I think either my junior or senior year when I was 16 or 17, who was a teenage phenom bodybuilder who I trained with, who lived in the same apartment complex as me. And we trained together for like a month, and I just didn't like it, So for me, I needed to have the experience of lifting weights at the time, where I also needed an outlet to kind of really put its hooks in me. So I think if I'd gotten into it because I wanted to be, like hot for girls or something like that, which of course every teenager gets wrong, then I don't think I would have stuck with it either way. So it really took something that personally invested me emotionally to stay with it.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. It's funny because I actually got into lifting sort of for a very similar reason. My first girlfriend actually dumped me in late 2010, I think. And sort of, early 2011, I sort of started lifting weights because I had this idea in my mind that she probably dumped me because I was chubby. And I told myself, listen, I will never ever feel this, like I won't ever split up with a girl and then wonder, was it because I was, too fat for her liking or something like that? And basically I went to this buddy of mine who had some weights around, and I sort of had a very similar outlet, or I viewed it as an outlet. I was just angry and upset over this whole situation. So I just started, lifting weights, and he had a bag, so we started hitting the bag and stuff, just to let my anger out. So I can definitely relate to that. It's funny how that works, and I think I managed actually to accomplish that in a sense, because since then I haven't really thought about it, when I broke up with someone, that probably wasn't because of the way I look. So in a sense, I think I managed to achieve that.
Yeah, it's funny what can bring us to something and how it can change. I had a reasonably unhealthy relationship with bodybuilding initially, because it was me expressing, dealing with some trauma in my life. But now it's something that I absolutely love, and it gives me balance and more focus and direction. So yeah, I totally understand.
Since you brought up this topic, I wanted to ask your opinion about it. Like, why do you think that is that most people quit the gym after a couple of months, basically? Like, I work in a gym, so I know how that is. Like, I constantly see people who, they pay their monthly membership and see them maybe in the first week, and then they never show up again. Or perhaps they do show up for a month, then they disappear, then they start again next year, and so on. Like, I've known people for like 4 to 5 years who combined maybe have 6 months of actual training in those 4 to 5 years. Why do you think that is, and what differentiates the people who do stick with the gym from the people who don't?
Yeah, it's so simple. They don't like it. That's really all it is. If someone doesn't enjoy training and they think they're supposed to do it to be healthy or to look a certain way or to not be something they dislike, which is the most common thing. Gyms normally advertise themselves like they do in dodgeball, like Globo Gym, like, you're broken, come on in and get fixed, and that's not really a great motivator in and of itself. But more importantly, I just think people don't like it. And the people who stick with it like it. I have had a number of clients, friends, family, etc., come up to me and just shake their head and go, "You're just so disciplined. I can't imagine doing what you're doing." And my first thought is, I can't imagine not doing it. Like, this is my favorite part of the day, I've never successfully stayed on a 3-day per week training program, even if I thought it might be appropriate at a given time, just because I don't want to spend 4 out of 7 days out of the gym. So I'm almost always on a 4 to 6 day per week training program, and I've even played with training every day. I remember back in the day having like an abs, calves, and forearm day just so I can get in the gym. So I think that's the big difference. And Some people might hear that and go, oh, damn, well, I guess if I'm not, a guy who, or a gal who just loves lifting weights, it's not going to work for me. But I think there's actually a really important message there, is that if you're someone who's trying to adopt a lifestyle that includes fitness, and it doesn't need to be like hardcore weightlifting, bodybuilding, like me or you, but just being active, it's so incredibly important for life and fitness and health, that if you can find something that you do get excited about every day, that you think about on the days you're going to go to that activity, whether it's intramural softball or swimming or hiking, it doesn't matter. It's just so important to find that. And if you think that something you don't like, that you dread, that you feel like you're supposed to do, is going to sustain you to go do it like 3 or 4 days a week. I mean, people miss their annual dental appointments. Like you need to be there 1 day out of the year. And people miss it because they don't like the dentist. And you're going to expect them to be there 3 days per week at least, even though they don't like the gym. I just think it's not a realistic expectation. And, that just goes to show you how short-term and how temporary willpower is. Like, you can make yourself do something for, like you said, for a couple months at most, but you're human. Eventually, you're just going to stop doing it. And some of that's the initial uncomfortability of developing a habit, but you're not going to develop a habit you really, really don't like at all. At least it needs to be neutral. Like, for example, we all brush our teeth, but we don't think about it. We don't have a negative. I would say, I'll speak for myself. I don't have a negative feeling about brushing my teeth. I don't like or dislike it. It's just something I do. And I guess you can get there with lifting, but it's really difficult as an adult when, you're not starting at 3 years old. So it becomes this, this habit that's just part of your life for forever. It's something you're trying to adopt as an adult. And that means you're probably going to have to make it attractive to you and something you enjoy, and find a way to integrate it with your life so that it's not this chore. That's why diets fail, and that's why training fails, because people do something they don't like, pretty simply.
Yeah, it's so simply put, yet so true. Now, I wonder, like, I remember initially, like, I'm not particularly gifted. I was not good at picking up exercises initially. I think that's why I would say so that makes me actually a pretty good trainer or coach, because I had to think, so much about each exercise or how to set up for a particular body part, and it was never something that just came to me naturally. So I initially sucked at it, and I was very weak. But I sort of had this idea in my mind that, listen, if I just quit now, then I won't end up looking any better, and I will not feel better about myself either. So I just, I kept going, and over time, it's sort of this transformed into actually, starting to suck less and enjoying the whole process. Do you think that initial disdain or not liking the particular thing can be shifted over time? Because I personally think that a very big part or large part of it is simply people, I think, go into it with the wrong expectations, and perhaps, they don't really know what to do, and that also is a turn-off. And simply the way gyms are set up is not like a group class, or, not everyone are forced to hire a personal trainer who can work with them one-to-one. So they're sort of, left with asking other guys or girls, what they do. And that's pretty much how we started. Like, we just went to guys and just monkey see, monkey do. Basically, we just copy others and pick things up along the way. So do you think, or how much time do you think, let's ask it this way, how much time do you think someone should give this whole fitness or weightlifting thing before they decide that it's not for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, is that initially, depending on what your expectations are, you might make gains that are faster, slower, or you don't feel like you're making any gains compared to what you expect. And I think that all depends on what brings you into it. I was reading muscle magazines with all the IFBB pros on the front. So I remember Berto and I talking, and this is after we'd actually or we were at least prepping for our first show. I can't remember if we hadn't already done it, or maybe it was 2008 after it. And he told me, one day, like, and we knew we were going to stay natural, you're going to be 220 pounds on stage. And that seemed very reasonable to me. I'm 6 foot, and there are 6 foot natural bodybuilders who are 220 pounds on stage. They're just not going to be named Eric Helms, It's just not me, So I had, even as before I realized what natural bodybuilding was, and even once I knew what natural bodybuilding was, I had unrealistic expectations from the start. But I was very, very motivated to work hard, and I did a number of dreamer bulks along the way, and I expected to get greater gains than I did. But even when I was not getting the gains I'd hoped for, I got enough progress that it was still motivating, and the idea of, okay, well, back to the drawing board was actually exciting for me. So I know for me, I gamified it in my head. Each time I couldn't get what I wanted, I saw it as, let me figure out what I need to do to actually make progress. And I think some people see it as a little too linear. Like, here's what I did. It didn't work. I don't like this. And I think in some ways, understanding the complexity and there's so much to learn is actually helpful in that way. Because when I had times where I couldn't just be stronger on a very simplistic or unnecessarily complicated, but I'll just say a beginner program, whatever I was doing at the time, when I couldn't make progress, I had the awareness to know that there were other things I could try. There's other ways to set it up, and there was almost an infinite number of programs, or I could eat more, I could try higher protein, or I could buy a supplement. I had all these options in front of me as ways to potentially get around this plateau. And I think that's a useful piece of knowledge. It can also be a little discouraging because there's so much out there. But the difference between me and someone who might quit, I think, was, if you're not doing it for reasons that have like intrinsic value and you're not actually enjoying it, you don't want to try other stuff. You just want to be like, would someone just tell me what to do? I just want the program that works. Like, that's just what I wanted. Like, what works, and I'll do it, But if you have no interest in trying to figure that out, trying to find it out, and if you don't enjoy that process of actually trying to figure yourself out and realizing that you're kind of this N of one organic machine that is genetically unique on the planet, and your environment and your mind, your psychology, all that interacts together. And that means that there's going to be a program right now that might work for you or doesn't. And then guess what? When you find a program that does work for you, as you adapt, it'll stop working for you, and now you're a different combination of things because you're an adaptive machine, and you got to find something else out, or fix a new problem, or keep looking inward and trying this whole process of self-discovery and then self-reinvention. So if that's not something that you can get hooked into, you're probably going to quit. So I think that's important, and so I think going into it and not knowing what to do and starting with monkey see, monkey do is actually really an important step of the way. And it can look a little more sophisticated. It might be, these days I've met people who their first exposure to how to lift weights might be someone in the quote unquote evidence-based community, which was super rare when I got into it, and it's super cool. But it's still essentially the same thing. You might start with reading a book or watching a video by someone, and it's actually quite good information, but it's only going to work for you as long as it works, and you might need to modify it or figure it out. And I think if you enjoy that process, that's when you know the hooks are in you. But a lot of people who are simply just, look, all I want is a means to an end, versus actually enjoying that means and being involved in that process, are probably not going to stick with it.
Hey guys, I interrupt the episode to remind you that as much as I love making these episodes, they do not pay the bills. Coaching does for me. So if you'd be interested in working with me in a one-to-one fashion, I also offer online coaching for a limited number of clients interested in body composition optimization. So if you'd like to lose fat, build muscle, or any combination of the two, then don't hesitate to reach out to me via an email. My email address is always in the description of these episodes, and we can chat further from there. I am also available for 30 or 60-minute consultations for people who are not quite ready to invest into a full-on coach just yet. Thank you, and let's continue the episode. I've been thinking when you were saying about expectations and stuff. Like, I always tell youngsters, so to speak, in the gym, like I'm so old. It sounds so pretentious of me, but maybe 18, 19-year-olds, stuff like that, that they are so in a much more favorable position. Like even like in the gym itself, like they have a colleague of mine who is he just won the European IMBA championship, got his PMBA pro card. So he's also a very, very high level, relatively speaking, high level natural bodybuilder. And they definitely have who to learn from. And we are also much more open and much more willing to give advice than what we sort of received back when we started. But at the same time, they are also in a harder position because, at worst, I compare myself with someone who was a big guy at the gym. Like, we barely had Facebook. I think there was no Instagram. Like, I didn't have an entire world to compare myself to. So I think in that sense, it's also a blessing and a curse to have all kinds of, fitness influencers available at your fingertip, basically. And you have an entire world to get inspired by, but also get sort of demotivated by, in a sense, because you get into this endless spiral of just, comparing yourself to others and feeling like you will never be good enough, basically. So you can sort of get into this paradigm, sort of in the whole, Instagram sphere or culture. Like, how should people think about this whole comparison thing? Where is the line? How do you view the line between being motivated or following others because you draw inspiration or motivation from them, and they push you to become a better version of yourself, versus feeling inadequate or feeling like I'm never going to look like my favorite Instagram celebrity?
I think that's a really good question. And I think two things need to occur. You need to be self-aware and you need to be intentional. Because like I said before, I don't think things have fundamentally changed with social media. I think it's become an accelerant and a catalyst. And there's a saying that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very, very true saying if you don't have that intention and that self-awareness. So let me give you an example. And this is something that my friend and colleague and my client, Bryce Lewis, has talked about a lot publicly. So for those who don't know, Bryce Lewis is a world champion IPF lifter in the 105 class. He won 2018 Worlds. He got silver at 2017 Worlds, and he's won USAPL Nationals, which is arguably the most competitive drug-free raw powerlifting meet in the world in his class 3 times now. And he has an unofficial world record in the total. He's totaled over 900 kilos as a 105 drug-free raw lifter, which is just mind-blowingly insane. And when Bryce Lewis gets ready for a competition, he has to stop following other lifters and not paying attention to it because he feels inadequate. So just so people understand, like, your brain will find a way to bring your insecurities forward, so that even if you are literally the strongest person in your competitive class, whoever you're actually comparing to, objectively, subjectively, you may not feel like that. So that's why intentionality is so important, and self-awareness. Unfortunately, Bryce has both. And you can absolutely use social media as a tool to enhance your motivation and to drive you forward. But if you're not paying attention, and if your feed has its own life, that can definitely go wrong. So I think what I ask people to do is that you follow a lot of people because you say they inspire you, or they're impressive, or you like to look at their pictures. But I think you really need to ask yourself, well, how do I feel when I look at it? If I look at this, does it make me want to go to the gym? Does it make me feel like anything's possible? Does it get me excited to train? Or do I just feel inadequate? And if the answer is, more often than not, it's the latter, not the former, man, you probably just want to stop following that person. It's not necessarily their fault, So here's an example that surprised me. For those who don't know, and I don't do it as much of late, but I need to get back into it. I've gone through periods where on my Instagram I posted a lot of pictures of old school lifters. And when I say old school, I mean as far back as cameras existed. So, Indian physical culturists from 1930, or vaudeville style strongman era from the 1800s, or the Mr. America from 1939 up until 1953. That's the pre-steroid era, because I know I have a lot of natural bodybuilders following me, and they want to see what kind of physiques have been developed prior to the invention of an application in bodybuilding of anabolic steroids. And most people are like, oh my God, this is incredible. How do we know for sure they weren't on gear? That's so amazing. But I did get a message from someone one time who said, man, that's so demotivating. This guy with 50 years old information or 60 years old information, not knowing how to track macros or blah, 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 whatever the stuff they believed was quote unquote optimal, has developed a physique that I could never hope to get at the age of 19. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. So I think you have to be aware of your own self-talk and your own perspective. And if that's the way you look at those things, then maybe it's useful to put some blinders on, Early on in my career, I always needed to have this kind of belief that there was, I could get really, really far in natural bodybuilding. Because I had a fear that I was inadequate, that I didn't have good genetics, that I wasn't able to build muscle very, very well. And I think that's all a reference points of who you compare yourself to, And I was always looking to like other people who I saw myself one day competing against. I was comparing myself to Philip Ricardo Jr. or Jim Cordova, or Martin Daniels, or it was a little before Doug Miller's time at this time, but I was looking at all the best natural bodybuilders on the planet. And same thing with powerlifting. I was looking up to people, I was looking at Bryce. I started coaching him in 2010, leading up to his first powerlifting meet. And we've competed in the same weight class, and he's totaled literally 200 to 300 kilos more than I have in the same weight class. And that's one way of comparing it. But here's an example of how we can see comparison as so inherently subjective. If I look at my total compared to just the world, so for example, some federations have class 4, 3, 2, 1, master, and elite level classifications. And back in the day, I think the American Powerlifting Association had that. I think the last time I looked at it was 2012. And USAPL did something similar and started doing it a couple of years ago. Anyway, class 1 means that your total is stronger than 85% of the people who have registered a total in the organization. And at times I have been at class 1 or above class 1 in my weight class. Now that the field's a little steeper, I'm not quite there yet anymore. But the point is that objectively, among powerlifters, people who actually have decided to compete in powerlifting, I'm in the top, 10 to 20%, 10 to 20th percentile. That's objectively way more than adequate, That's very strong. It doesn't make me a world champion. It doesn't make me good enough to qualify for the Arnold or any of those things. But if that's my standard, that just goes to show you can always find a way to make your standard something that you haven't achieved yet and make yourself feel bad. So I think you have to be aware of that your own goalpost will forever shift. So how do you take some control over that and some intentionality and actually seek out sources of motivation that drive you forward rather than make you feel like the goalpost is always just going to be just outside of your reach? Because even world champions feel that way. So for me, I am very intentional with what I follow on social media. I'm self-aware. I sit down and have conversations with myself, figure out what my why is. And I have very intentionally shifted my focus from being extrinsically motivated to something more intrinsic. So instead of trying to be the best natural bodybuilder defined as winning WNBF Worlds or the Natural Olympia, or trying to be the best powerlifter by winning IPF Worlds or winning USAPL Raw Championships, Raw National, I have focused on, all right, how do I improve? This is an individual sport. The only way that I'm going to beat anybody else is the same way that I simply just get better than where I was. So the only person I compare myself to is me. But even more than that, now that I'm 36, I'll be 37 next year in April, and I've got colleagues around me who are, like Jeff Alberts, who just competed at WPF Worlds at the age of 48. We're starting to think about the very real possibility that we may no longer be able to be better than our previous self. Typically your 40s, and sometimes in cool rare cases your early 50s, is where you stop making progress. Like there's some pretty amazing IPF lifters and natural bodybuilders who progress well into their 50s, like Marshall Johnson as an example. But anyway, I don't know when my clock will be up and when I'm no longer making progress and I'm simply holding on to the strength or the physique I have and finding ways to make something a little bit better, like get a little bit leaner or pose a little bit better or get better color, or maintain more muscle during the prep process, or modify my technique because I can't necessarily put on more muscle mass or refine my neuromuscular patterns. But there will come a time when I reach that point. And I think just like someone who is purely trying to hunt for the gold medal or the first place can achieve burnout and look back and realize they spent 10 years working really hard, achieving amazing things, but didn't enjoy it because they didn't get a gold medal. I think that can start to happen even when you aren't focused on that and you're focused on beating yourself once you start trying to beat your age. And you see a lot of lifters who don't compete in the Masters 1 or Masters 2 class and they retire when they still might enjoy lifting and enjoy the competitive process if they could just reframe their perspective. So I think finding meaning in whatever you're doing, especially something healthy like lifting, that gives you all these secondary benefits, and that is a way for you to, like we talked about, it's an outlet for your emotional expression. I think you have to go through these stages of motivation, starting perhaps with, if you're an athlete, extrinsic motivation and validation and achieving something outside of you, to eventually trying to beat yourself, to eventually just enjoying the process and enjoying lifting for lifting's sake. And I'm fortunate that I've gotten there. I know for sure that I'll never not be lifting unless I have some kind of catastrophic injury that prevents me from doing it. And even then, I'll find a way to do something. But I think that is an evolution of motivation that each person needs to go through if they're going to be lifting for a lifetime.
Yeah, I actually wanted to bring up that comparison, the Thief of Joy quote. I remember hearing it from Elon Musk on Joe Rogan's podcast like a year ago, I think it was, because I've seen some memes that it was a year ago already. It's one of my favorites, actually. And you're so right. Like we were discussing this with Abel, that listen, objectively speaking, like you said yourself, we both, Abel and I, we are quote unquote bigger than most people. We are more muscular than most people, yet we still, compare ourselves with, like you said, the best of the best. Like we compare ourselves with others who are 6 feet tall, but who compete on the WMBF world stage, perhaps, who maybe have 10 kilos more muscle than we do. And since you mentioned something about age, I originally didn't want to bring this up, but now I have to ask you. I don't know if you've seen it. Eric Salazar posted something about, him being the product of, 17 years, however long he's been lifting. And Lal commented that, no, you have been the product of basically 3 to 5 years of lifting and then just sort of maintaining. And, Lyle has this very pessimistic view, which partially he's right, but also at the same time he isn't, that, you will put on the majority of your muscle in the first 3 years, maybe 5 if you're being generous, but then past that point, you're pretty much just scraping around for more muscle. And he sort of has this pessimistic view of the situation, whereas Abel and I view it from the other point of view, which is that, yeah, that's just reality, but it is what it is. Now we just have to work that much harder. And yes, gains are going to slow down, but we can obviously still improve. Look at examples like Jeff, of course, is the best one, but others who are still improving beyond, obviously, those 3 to 5 years. So where do you think, or what is your opinion, or where do you lie on this continuum? Like, how should people view this situation? Because I guess Lyle was originally, his point was to not discourage lifters. Like he said that, for example, if a beginner comes to him, if he will tell him that, you will need 20 years to look at like, your favorite lifter, then that guy will probably just won't even bother. But if you tell him that, listen, you'll probably need 2 to 3 years to build a very, very good foundation, then that might be a bit more optimistic point of view.
Yeah, I think most of these arguments online are typically people talking across each other. I know Eric, and he just got his IFBB Pro card, as a natural bodybuilder, which actually happens a fair amount in people who compete in like the bantam or the lightweight class, and then they never go on to compete in the IFBB Pro ranks. Or if they do, it's just for the experience. There's tons of people who are in those weight classes who wouldn't be there if they used anabolic steroids, and that's kind of the thing. And so anyway, the point being is that I think Eric is looking back and going, "Oh my God, I can't believe I achieved something that so few natural bodybuilders achieve, and it took me, 20 years to get to it." And that's a true statement, because whatever combination of learning, physical changes, and better approaches in the gym and in the kitchen allowed him to bring a physique to the stage that was good enough on that day to win, did include 20 years of learning. It didn't include 20 years of muscle building, but that's not the point, and that's not necessarily the way he's reflecting and looking back. So who's the audience? Who are you talking to? If Eric is talking to a young, up-and-coming person who wants to compete in bodybuilding and who wants to achieve the same heights, and maybe who has a similar genetic hand or is going to stay natural but potentially compete against those who are not, then yeah, they need to know that it's not a sure thing, and it might take you 20 years before you find the right combination of things that result in it. If someone comes up to Eric and they say, "Hey, I'd like to build some muscle. How do I get to a similar level of muscularity? I don't want to step on stage, but I really want to fill out my shirts better." And he goes, "It's going to take you 20 years of grinding." Then yeah, then I think that's probably where Lyle is coming from. So it just depends on who each one of them is talking to and what they're referring to. And I would say that yes, if you do everything right, and if you are not spending time off and on cutting or going on vacation, and you have an optimal training program for you and an optimal nutrition plan, and you are, doing everything perfectly under the sun, yeah, I think probably at the 5-year mark, you will have built 99% of the muscle mass you'll have. But I don't know many situations even when that's true. You could say, but what if you follow all the scientific principles? Like, well, these change, like what we think is best is an evolutionary process, that's because it's exercise science. So, and the likelihood that you're going to not go on a mini cut somewhere along the way, or not get hurt, or not go on vacation, or not go through a breakup and then stop lifting weights for 6 months. I think the reality is that it takes people closer to maybe 10 years to build all their muscle from doing things in a not necessarily optimal fashion. Maybe competing early. Like for example, I got on stage for the first time in 2007. I started lifting weights in 2004. I certainly hadn't built all my muscle mass by that point. And then I went through, the disastrous process of dieting down for a show, which is actually the worst thing you can do for how much muscle you could have, short of not lifting weights anymore. You tank your testosterone, don't eat enough, mess up your sleep schedule, and then get a really unhealthy relationship with food in your body for a while that takes, another 6 months to recover from, right? So then I competed in 2009, then I competed in 2011. So when I was getting close to that point of maybe where on paper I could have built my most amount of muscle mass, I was competing every other year. And then on and off competing in powerlifting, where I wasn't able to complete probably the amount of volume I needed. And I remember still figuring out a lot of the things about my body, like my upper body needs more volume and more frequency to grow effectively. If I do low bar squats with a high frequency, it jacks up my hips. I had to get hip surgery in 2017. If you look back on my career, it's not that different from any other very, very, very serious lifter. There's a few injuries here and there. There might have been a surgery. There's some competition preps. There's some burnout. There's some, periods where things, because of the competition demands, were not ideal for competition, like in bodybuilding, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the reality is that there is no real optimal scenario where you gain those rates that we talk about to where you get there in 5 years. I think you can get close, but I think the reality is most people, even if they do everything right or most things right and objectively they use the best information they had at the time, we're probably looking at close to a decade before you max out your physique. But that's also not the question that was asked. When do you first start to look good, and have you put on a fair amount of muscle, and does your family start to go, oh wow, you're doing this weightlifting thing? They do that little curl motion at Thanksgiving. That happened to me within 6 months. I put on 15, 20 pounds of muscle in my first 6 months to a year, and that drastically changed my physique. And that is the largest change I saw and will ever see in my physique from a pure muscle building standpoint. And now, as far as the most drastic change visually, that's when you go through a contest prep, and that's actually losing fat and losing muscle. So it's not even the right conversation, and I can understand. I don't even think it's a continuum. I think it's two people talking about two different things, and then arguing, which, that's most arguments. So, and another way to look at it too is that if you have the perspective of a competitive athlete, putting on 1 pound or keeping 1 pound or getting 1% leaner in terms of body fat, that is an almost non-visible change when you're wearing street clothes and you're out in a meeting or you go to a party or when you're dating, so it doesn't matter. But when you're on stage competing, that can put you back 2 or 3 placings, And I think there's a thing in statistics called, and depending on which paradigm of statistical thought you're using, it's called different things, but it's for example, a minimum clinical difference or the smallest worthwhile change. And these are basically, you subjectively set this amount, or you base it off the standard deviation of a given sample, and you decide what's the amount of change that matters, and it's context dependent. So for example, if you're talking about how much do you need to reduce your 100-meter sprint time to place higher in the Olympics, my God, we're talking about less than 1/10 of a second, That's something that you can't even clock if you're doing hand timing with a fast person, and you need electronic timers to do, but might drop you a full medal count on the podium. And, I think that's something people forget, is that if you take like the top 5 sprinters in the world and you take their times at different points in the year and different peaking cycles, or just take a bad day for Usain Bolt and a good day for someone else, and you put them together, the medal count shifts around pretty consistently. And that is very different than saying, hey, how long would it take me to get really fast? The first time I ran on the track, I ran a 14-second 100 meters. How do I get down to sub 12, which for all intents and purposes is fast. It's not a sub 10. That's a big difference. And then, making the final 10% improvement is going to be the difference from even getting to Olympic trials. You know what I'm saying? So, you're looking at smaller and smaller changes as you approach your peak potential. It's an asymptote. But those smaller and smaller changes are being compared against other people who are making smaller and smaller changes. So now they become big relative changes. And there's a lot of ways they can occur. So, for example, I remember Jeff, and he was doing a lot more things right than wrong when he was competing on his own before he hooked up with 3D Muscle Journey. He got on stage just under 160 pounds in 2009 when he got his pro card. And just now competing this year, he was close to 170. So did he put on 10 pounds of muscle? No, he kept 10 more pounds of muscle in the dieting process. So there's a lot more things that go into the end result. But it did take him years and years and years of learning and trial and error to figure out how to do that in his diet for that to exist. So if we're talking about the raw physiological process of maxing out anabolism in muscle cells, sure, 4 years of time and you have all the biggest muscles on the planet. But if we talk about being a human in life and trying to get to the peak potential of maxing out your physique naturally, we're probably realistically might be looking at 20 years in some cases. So they're two different answers, and I think you just need to know your audience.
I chimed into the conversation. I sort of said the same thing, that whether the highest amount of muscle mass you can carry around versus your best look are very separate conversation. Like, if we want the most amount of muscle mass, we just bulk up to 30% body fat or whatever, and then we'll have the most amount of muscle mass per se on our frame, but that's not really going to help our aesthetic goals, so to speak. So like you said, it's just a different conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on, experience spectrum, so to speak. Let's say we did get past that stage where we have been bitten by the iron bug and now we do love lifting. What I noticed, especially with new lifters, especially with someone who, unfortunately, I know many people in person who have become sort of that way. Maybe they had some sort of emotional, or I don't want to call it mental issue, let's say, life issues that weren't really happy about, and then they found the gym, mostly women, and now that they found this outlet, they sort of went to this other extreme where the gym has become their temple and their existence basically, and they are I wouldn't call them beginners, but basically women who have been lifting for a year, but they are 7 days a week at the gym, 2 hours per day. They only eat clean, in quotation marks, like their entire existence revolves around the gym. And I also know examples where a person like that, perhaps I'm thinking of someone right now, and she sort of got sick for a month or two and she lost, 10 pounds. And she basically went to depression, like, oh my God, I used to look that way, and now I'm back with almost ground zero, and she was devastated. And, I think, again, this can be exaggerated by Instagram, and I don't know if you follow Stephanie Buttermore.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really been following her journey closely, but Abel has linked me to some of her posts, and I apologize in advance if I get the details wrong, but from what I gathered, what has happened is that she sort of maintained this artificially lean physique for years, and then basically just to, keep up this image that she felt like she had to maintain, of very lean, fit girl, #FitFem. And now she just became fed up, and she sort of went into how, she was constantly hungry and basically well, not necessarily starving, but basically underfed for years, and she was at a lower body fat level than her body would have wanted to settle at, and basically it was all for appearance's sake. And I think that's not uncommon. I would, if I had to guess, I would say that that's probably a higher percentage of the whole Instagram fitness community than we would like to admit. So again, I would like to hear your opinion, like how can we avoid, now that we've gotten into this whole fitness lifestyle, how can we avoid letting it become our entire existence and letting our physique basically overtake our entire, or letting our identity, sort of merge with the way we look? Because obviously anything can come, you can get sick, you can have some sort of life circumstance that prevents you from lifting for a couple of months. And like I said, the consequences can be devastating for some people.
That's a great question. I like how you framed it at the end too. Because when you were talking about Stephanie and you said just to look a certain way, I think that almost it really undervalues what's really going on there. And she's one of many who have struggled with this. And I really think it's awesome that she's being so transparent about it and showing where she's been and what she's trying to do and the psychology behind it. And so for example, if we look at it purely as just, we're maintaining a leaner physique than is, like you said, an artificially leaner physique, which requires this constant state of restraint, simply just to look a certain way, it almost takes away the piece of why. Why do we have such a strong drive to look a certain way? And that goes to what you said about self-identity and meaning and social acceptance and peer acceptance and belonging to a group and having an identity. All these things are at the core of it. It's not just simply like, hey, I want to look good in the mirror, And if you believe that to be accepted as a woman or accepted as a bodybuilder or attractive as a man or a good mate or a good partner or part of the club of lifters, do you even lift? Like that really is a saying, do you look like you lift? And if you don't look like you lift, guess what? You don't even lift. And it's a joke, it's a meme, but it's really saying, hey, if you don't look like you lift, you might as well not be lifting. And I think that's just kind of gets to the heart of how shitty the culture can be. There's really amazing things about the lifting culture. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It's my people. But if someone walks up to you and says, "Do you even lift?" what they're really saying is that the process of lifting, the act of lifting weights, all the benefits you get from it, the performance, the health, the mental changes, the challenges you put yourself through, your personal story, none of that matters. What actually defines whether you lift or not is if you look like you do. And how shitty is that? When you really, really think about it, it's saying that none of these values that come from lifting matter, only what actually happens. So if you get old, if you get sick, guess what? You have no value. That's basically what at the core of that message. And I think that's why it's so important, going back to what I said before, to really have intentionality and self-awareness and to understand your internal motivation. And to, whatever reason you initially got into lifting, to find more meaning in it. To realize that the changes you get to your physique is like, yeah, it might have been the entire reason you originally got into it, but man, the transformative process you can get from lifting, from any activity in life, you can find so much more about yourself, and you can self-define your own story and your own journey. You can make meaning from something as ridiculous as picking things off the floor, or in our competitors' cases, flexing in fake tanner after shaving our bodies on stage. That can be, a transformative journey. Picking things up and putting them down, like all the strange things we primates who populate this planet do, none of them have any more meaning than what we put into them. And if we choose to put into the meaning that it only matters what you look like based on your lift, that can really mess people up. And I think, I'm glad Stephanie is showing voice to that and showing the experience of it. I think it's really important for people to understand that obsessive nature, that need for control that I talked about, that I had, and that you had to some degree, and that we see a lot of people who are driven to start lifting weights and manipulating their diet that gets them into it. That's a great gateway, but it's a double-edged sword. The obsessive nature I have is both the key to my success and the key to my potential burnout and failure. It's the reason why my wife had an ultimatum discussion with me after my first competitive season, saying, "Hey, this isn't healthy. You're not doing this in a way that's conducive to your long-term sanity." And I didn't sign up for this. And that was a big realization for me after my 2007 season, that, man, I took this way too far. I was crazy. And it's very difficult to see when you're in it, because when you have an obsessive nature and you think you're bending your entire will towards improving this one thing in your life or this one aspect of you, probably because you're seeing it as your identity, then you think that all your effort and all your energy needs to go into it. And you forget that there's only so much objective energy that can go into something. There's only so many variables you can maximize. And when you start to then apply way more resources to something than can even be applied to it, it simply takes away other resources that could go to other aspects of your life. And the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, if you will, proverbially. What more can you do than eating an appropriate diet, training hard for an appropriate amount of time, and getting in enough sleep? Being stressed and not being, a well-adjusted human, or trashing all of your social relationships so you don't have the support network of your colleagues, or finding a job that allows you to skip out every 3 hours to eat, that eventually gets you fired or won't get you a raise so that it's harder to pay the bills, so you're more stressed out, that actually hurts your performance. All these things actually, from your obsession, become barriers. You end up messing up your own life and your own mental sanity, which ends up hurting your performance. I've seen a ton of competitors who go quote-unquote all in, and then they don't compete after their first or second season again because it's just too much. So one thing at 3D Muscle Journey that we really try to emphasize is that we're not here to maximize this season. We're here to give you the longest career possible, if you want it, in competitive physique or strength sport. And you have to take that you have to back up not just a few steps, but probably a few miles, and go, wait a minute, what's sustainable for me long term? What really gets me to where I want to go? What are my actual values? And do I have intrinsic value as a human? Do I have intrinsic value as Eric beyond just simply being a bodybuilder? And that might be how I'm self-identifying now. It might be a part of me, but it's not me. I existed before I started bodybuilding, and all of my personality characteristics might lead me to be a great member of this tribe of bodybuilders or physique athletes or what have you, recreational or competitive. That might be some really important, cool things, but it doesn't fundamentally change me from being Eric, who has intrinsic value, to now Eric, who only has value as a bodybuilder. And I do think when it becomes part of your identity, that is when there is more risk. Because if you get hurt, you're not only just losing your ability to participate in your sport of choice or something you really enjoy, you're losing you. And I think that can make some really poor decisions. That can lead to some true existential crises. And there's a lot of research out there on what's called athletic identity, when it looks at basically forced retirement in athletes and how do they cope. If you see yourself primarily as a football player and you blow out your ACL and you can no longer play football, then what does that mean about you? Who are you? And that's a question that's really important to ask. But when you're not prepared to ask it, it can be a pretty depressing and stressful process. So I think you touched on a lot of good things there. I think it's important to keep a sense of self, have a sense of self-worth. As my colleague Alberto Nunez says, diversify your happiness portfolio. Do more things in life that, like if you don't limit yourself to just being you as a lifter. Like if that's what you love, great. Like for example, that's just my everything. But I have it as a coach, I have it as an academic, I have it as an athlete in like 4 different sports. I have a community that I've built from it. If I was paralyzed tomorrow, I would still be able to be engaged with the iron community as a coach, as a thinker, and I would still find meaning in life and love it, even though all my muscle would atrophy away. I would still be someone who is part of the iron game. And I think that's the kind of perspective that is probably a little more sustainable and a little more resilient and less precarious to the curveballs life will throw your way. So I think that's a big piece of everything you're talking about there. You need to know your why, and you need to have that self-awareness, and you need to know your motivations, and you need to have intrinsic self-worth, or that sword that allows you to cut right to the heart of things and push very hard and be obsessive when it's appropriate and achieve things that require a ton of discipline and dedication. It will be double-edged, and it will cut you on the backswing.
Yeah, so many good points, and I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours and still barely scratch the surface on this. So on the identity front, I want to talk about something that has been linked, has always been part of the bodybuilding sphere, but lately has been perhaps, sadly, even a larger, from what I see, a larger part, and it hasn't been for the reasons originally it has been developed for. And I'm talking about, the whole anabolic or the enhanced side of things, because, I think you will agree that way back, people simply took them because, hey, they felt like, listen, I want to compete, and to compete the best, that's just what we had to do. Like, natural bodybuilding wasn't really too popular. I don't even know if it was a thing or not, maybe 20 years ago or something like that, 30 years ago. But nowadays, like I said, I work in the gym, and the reasons people take like steroids and the years and the experience levels after which they take them is just sad. Like, just to give you an example, like when I started lifting in 2011, like I kid you not, like couple of months into it, like there was a guy who said to me, listen, don't you want to take them stuff? Like, look around. He showed me like 3 guys. Listen, he was like, look, that guy has been taking for like, 6 months. That guy has been on for like a year. Look how big he is. And the other guy, the really big one, he's been for like 3 years, man. Look at him. Like, look how big he is. Like, think about it. And I was like, nah, I don't really have the money, and I'm not really interested. I'm sure it's not really safe, so I think I'll skip. And he was like, are you crazy? Like, do you know how long it will take you to, look good, like, without him? Like, that's the mentality many people have. Like, it's not, I want to compete on a high level. I'm good at this. I love this, but I want to also compete and excel at this sport. I will take them because it is what it is, part of the sport. It's, I'm too lazy, or I don't want to work for 5 years or 10 years. I want the results now, or I want to look like this guy who has been lifting for like 10 years, but I want to achieve it in a year. And they basically, start using stuff, obviously without any knowledge, or with very little knowledge, or without any medical supervision or blood tests or stuff like that. So basically irresponsibly. And the other side is, especially here in Romania, I don't know if this is the same now you're in New Zealand, or if it was the same way in the US, like most personal trainers in my city, like they are pretty much juiced, and their only qualification, or let's just say credentials or way of marketing themselves, is basically the way they look. And I couldn't tell you how many people I know who have pretty much had zero tangency with the gym. Like they started lifting, they started juicing, and now suddenly they're a trainer and a coach. And it's just sad on many fronts. So I threw a lot at you. It wasn't really a question. I know it just, my thoughts around the whole topic. Just let me know if you agree, if you've seen the same sort of, you had the same experience, if you think that it's the same over there, or it's just really a Romanian or European thing, because I know it's not just Romania, but it might be just a European thing. What do you think about this?
Well, it's definitely going to be different in different cultures, and different regulation, and different costs. But I think even if it's a lot less prominent, that exact description you gave in other countries, you will still find those same pockets and gyms and motivations. And so, like for example, I think there's a ton of trainers in New Zealand and the United States who are not using anabolic steroids, like the entire yoga community, a lot of them are certified trainers, group exercise trainers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, whether we're talking about personal trainers in the weightlifting community, whether we're talking about gyms that cater to group X classes or lifters, whether we're talking about countries where it's illegal or not, it's very, very rare in certain parts of Europe, like Scandinavia, the Scandinavian countries. It's really rare to find people who use anabolic steroids, and in some cases, the gym can actually do testing of its members randomly. And the cultures are very anti-drug, and others they're very accepting. Some countries it's illegal. Some countries it's illegal to sell but legal to take. Some countries you can walk down the street, and I've done a lot of traveling. People just will look at you, see that you lift, and a pharmacy person out front will be like, "Hey, would you like some?" and just rattle off a bunch of different anabolic steroids at you. And sometimes you can walk into a place without a prescription and just get it. Or if you know the right person, it's very easy. In other places, it's quite difficult. You need to know the right connect, and the punishments are quite severe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it does change. It's very different country to country, community to community. But I think one thing that's really important to remember is, just like someone who is entirely focused on the outcome for lifting and doesn't really enjoy it, who's natural, is probably not going to stick with it. The same can be said if you're on anabolic steroids. I can't tell you how many people I've met who, you wouldn't know they're on anabolic steroids if they didn't tell you, because they aren't putting in the kind of effort that would even get them good natural gains. But 10 years from now, I highly doubt they're going to be doing it. They're going to find something else, and probably for their betterment. And it's the same reason people will buy supplements and barely even train, or have a gym membership but only train 6 months out of a 10-year period, like you were talking about before. They don't really enjoy it. Like, if their response to you saying, "No, I'm good," is, "Are you crazy? Don't you know how long it'll take?" Like, it's like, if we're talking about rock climbers, right? Someone who actually loves rock climbing isn't going to go, "Are you crazy? Why don't you just take an elevator?" I'm enjoying climbing the rock. What are you talking about? So I think that the difference, and not to say that everyone who takes anabolic steroids doesn't actually like lifting. It's just like, for example, when we had John Meadows and Mike Israetel on Iron Culture to talk about this, we shared a lot of the same loves. It's just they're climbing a mountain with a higher peak, and it's another way to look at it. I talked to a older competitor back in 2009 who gave me a lot of props, and he was an enhanced bodybuilder, and he was like, "Hey man, I just look at it as the difference between like NASCAR and stock car racing, different fuels." And I was like, "I like that. We're both race car drivers." But yeah, there's a lot of people who take anabolic steroids for the same reasons they would take, CBD oil, or buy a waist trainer or something like that. It's a quick fix. It happens to be an effective quick fix, but it's also a drug. It has side effects, and if done incorrectly, it can cause acute or even long-term side effects, and it can have neurological effects. It can, depending on what you're taking and the dosage, it can put you at a greater risk of having, heart issues or metabolic issues. So yeah, it's definitely not something to do casually, but a lot of people do it. To tie this into something you brought up earlier about, comparison, the whole natty or not movement, like the process of seeing someone and then assessing visually whether or not you think they're on gear completely comes down to self-comparison. Like you assess, well, not you, most people will make that knee-jerk reaction of whether or not they think someone visually is on gear or not based on whether they think it's possible for them to accomplish it.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. And it goes right back to Instagram. If you're looking at a picture, does this person actually inspire you, or do their posts demotivate you? And when you have the easy out of saying, "Oh, they're on a gear," it's a sidestep to being demotivated. And that was why that person messaged me about the people from before anabolic steroids were around. They were demotivated because that wasn't an out, or at least it was part of it. And you wouldn't believe the comments that I get, trying to justify some way that someone from the 1800s was using performance-enhancing drugs. Like, I joke about time traveling, but I've heard stuff like, well, weren't they using, methamphetamines? And I'm like, do you think methamphetamines build muscle? Let's pretend they all were using methamphetamines and it was widespread and that anyone who started lifting weights, even though it was incredibly rare, was taking meth on a regular basis. A, not true, but B, that wouldn't help them. It's and there are people who are probably otherwise logical in their lives, but will go through any kind of hoop they can to protect themselves from that demotivation, that pain, of going, oh man, maybe I can't accomplish that. Because that's when you have your identity of lifting and when lifting is really important for you. And the only motivation you have is to look a certain way. And you're in that do you even lift culture, where the defining characteristic of being a part of this tribe that you want so desperately to find acceptance in is looking like you lift. If that's all it is, then yeah, you'll go through whatever you need to believe you can get further. And when you see someone who has, achieved something you don't think you can achieve, the best way to protect yourself is to say that you can achieve that, but they achieve something else. That's different. I'm going to change the goalpost. They're on anabolic steroids, and it's not anything objective. It's completely an emotional response, and you can see sometimes when someone on the other side will try to use logic and go, well, hold on, this person's only 160 pounds at 5'9". They've been on the stage at the same weight for 5 years, and they're just really lean. You don't actually know what you're talking about. They're like, oh, they're using diuretics, and that's a random picture of them in their living room. You think they take diuretics on a Thursday when they're 8 weeks out? What are you talking about? So the kind of things I've seen people say, it is so obvious that it is because of the same thing we've been talking about, that if your only motivation is to look a certain way, if it's all about getting from point A to point B, and you have no enjoyment in the process, not only will it lead to these unhealthy behaviors we've talked about, the depression, the person getting sick, having an eating disorder, having an unhealthy relationship with the gym, training too hard, overtraining, hurting relationships, keeping yourself unhealthily lean for years and then having to figure out how to eat like a normal person again, or taking anabolic steroids and you've only been lifting weights for a few weeks and poo-pooing the idea of doing it naturally because it takes too long. All of those things come down to not having any meaning or value in the process or the intrinsic value to it. And it comes down to just doing it to look a certain way. And that's unfortunate. I think the majority of those people either will not stick with it and just find something else, which is good. Because honestly, if you only do that really unhealthy behavior for a couple of years, awesome. It won't break you too bad. But if you manage to force yourself to do anabolic steroids, to hate yourself, to follow social media, to get sick, to overtrain, to ruin your relationships for 5 to 10 years, it's going to do a lot more damage. So it's almost a good thing when you meet people like that. You smile, you nod, you wish them the best, and you hope that they burn themselves out quick, not over the process of 10 years where they really ruin their life. And that they do find something that allows them to actually be engaged for intrinsic reasons.
Can definitely be a very destructive path, the whole anabolic usage, and like you said, it obviously the responsible usage is the rarest. The other two options usually are that either they quit altogether or they just get hooked forever. Like, I haven't used, but I would imagine it would be like driving a race car and then trying to go back to road legal speeds. You can either, I guess, accept it that it's been temporary and get used to traveling at regular speeds, or you can just live a very high-speed life and probably crash into a wall pretty early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who adopt performance-enhancing drugs as a long-term lifestyle thing, that's different. And I think that there's a certain number of choices that go with that, and you are potentially sacrificing some of the health benefits of lifting and taking on actual health risks. But I think if you find more meaning and value in, say, competing at a high level, or it doesn't make a lot of sense to be a lifelong performance-enhancing drug user if you're not actually competing, to me. But I that's also my own personal perspective. So yeah, I have a lot more of an easy time understanding fellow competitive bodybuilders on the enhanced side of the fence than I do someone who is recreationally taking anabolic steroids to look a certain way. But if maybe you can do it responsibly and you want to look a little more muscular and you don't have great genetics and it's just something that you do and it's a risk you accept, sure, but like you said, a lot of the examples you gave are not people doing it in an informed or responsible way, and a lot of the times it's not people who are actually enjoying the process of lifting and finding it. I mean, their physical activity and physical culture is not a thing for them. It's just, I'm doing what I need to do to look a certain way. And I think that probably begs the question of, do you have self-worth? Where do you find meaning? And, do you see your body as just a suit you're wearing? Which I think is kind of an unfortunate relationship to have with your body.
You brought up, athletic or athlete identity. Like, I think the best examples are the people who have managed to retire and stay retired, because I watch UFC and mixed martial arts just as a hobby of mine, and so it's so sad when you see people who have retired and then they come back at like 38 or 40, because simply they have identified themselves as being this fighter and they just can't find their way in the world, I think. And I think the happiest or the best examples are people like Dorian Yates, who pretty much have said, I've been a bodybuilder and now I'm not anymore, and I stopped using and I'm just a regular human being. And I enjoy biking and being active, but I don't have to maintain this look. Or Jay Cutler, someone like that. And I remember watching or reading some comments on Instagram. Jordan Peters was saying how he's trying one more push to get his IFBB Pro card, and someone asked him like, so what will you do after that? And he was like, I don't know, I'll be 160 pounds and happy. And they were like, what? It was like, why the hell am I supposed to maintain like 300 pounds if I'm not competing? Like, what's the point? I'm just pretty much every single day I'm just shortening my lifespan for something that I'm not really pursuing anymore. I mean, what's the point? Like, it's just a means to an end, and once that end has been fulfilled, then I just go back to being a regular human being and just lift weights for the pleasure of lifting weights.
Yeah, I do feel there are some, even for the competitors, like we're talking about, who have a similar mindset to me and do this for a deeper meaning. There is unfortunately probably a shorter career span if you're enhanced and trying to compete at the highest level. Trying to do what is required to be a Ronnie Coleman or a Jay Cutler or any of these Olympians, it takes more out of your body. And it's rare to see someone who's competitive in their 40s on the Olympia stage. There are obviously exceptions like Dexter Jackson. Hats off, man. It's amazing. But you will see a ton of people in their 40s. I was just at WNBF Worlds in New York, and man, it's rare to see someone on the world stage in the pros who isn't at least 30. They're out there for sure, but man, like the 30 to 50 is the prime age for competitive natural bodybuilders to be on stage. And I can think of a ton of examples of very high level natural bodybuilders who are still just as competitive, even approaching 50, which is pretty neat. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, I like that. I see myself probably competing in iron sports until I physically can't, but never stop lifting until I, physically can't or don't exist. And but yeah, for sure, it's a different ball game when you are using copious amounts of anabolics. That's for sure.
All right, so that was episode 41 of the Muscle Engineer podcast with Eric Helms. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find it valuable. I hope you were able to take away some gems or nuggets of wisdom and that you will be able to implement into your own life and training. So as usual, I want to end the episodes with some of my top, insights and key lessons I took away from this whole conversation. And the first one is something that Eric so simply pointed out. When I asked him why do people quit the gym, he was like, it's very simple. They don't enjoy it. And as simple as that sounds, it's very true. And actually, I got reminded of this yesterday when I went to the gym and did some cardio. And as I was walking on the incline, I was thinking that I'm walking here, and yes, I understand the physiological benefits. That's why I do them. I understand that it will improve my cardiovascular conditioning and it's good for heart health and all that stuff. But I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I feel absolutely no pleasure or reward from it. Now, I'm not saying that you would have to necessarily feel a sense of pleasure necessarily from training, but you should be able to get some sort of enjoyment out of it, And I was thinking that, my goodness, if I had to walk on an incline for like hours and hours every single day, I would not do it. I just simply would not do it. I just find it boring. Like there's no rhyme or reason to it for me. Like I'm just going, and I get nowhere. Like I'm listening to a podcast, I'm watching a video or something, so the time passes, and I do it because I have to, sort of, in my head. But that's the exact problem. Like I feel like I'm doing it because I have to. I'm not doing it because I enjoy it. And I guess that's that's the first lesson here. You have to find a way of training that actually not only gives you benefits, but also you get some sort of sense of enjoyment out of it. Like otherwise you won't stick to it. I am biased, of course. I think that lifting weights gives people a sense of enjoyment in the sense that, there is the subjective stuff, the pump and all that. But I think the biggest reward is simply getting stronger and seeing that you are able to lift weights that you haven't been able before. And I think that's in and of itself very rewarding. But listen, if you don't enjoy it, then you don't have to do it. Like, find something else. The important stuff is to be active. And yes, Eric and I are biased towards lifting weights, of course, but ultimately it's all about finding something that you love. I mean, go do some martial arts, go do some jiu-jitsu. That's actually going to help you if you get into some sort of trouble. Because having big muscles is not going to save your life necessarily. Jiu-jitsu might. Now, the second one is about the whole social media stuff. And again, Eric has put it so eloquently when he said, think about it like, what sort of feelings do you get when you watch these people on Instagram or whatever? Like, do you get this sense that, oh yes, I'm motivated, I'm inspired by them, and now I can go work on improving myself and being the best version of myself? Or do you see them, do you watch them, and do you think, oh my God, they are so perfect, I will never be able to look like them. Why am I so small? Why am I so weak? Why am I so fat? Why am I so this? Why am I so that? Because if it's the second, you need to get rid of the shit. Like, that stuff is not healthy and it will mess with your head. And I think that ties into the tail end of the episode where we discuss steroids. And I think that's the perfect mindset or headspace that people are in when they start using steroids for no reason other than, trying to end up looking like someone they inspire, or feeling inadequate and thinking that, injecting some stuff will make them more worthy or will raise their value as a human being, which is not the case. So I think those two insights or key ideas were my biggest lessons from this episode. I think I'll end the episode here. As always, thank you for listening. I don't take any of this for granted, so I am very, very grateful for all of the support I get. As always, if you enjoy these episodes, please share it with a friend. Share it on your story, tag me on Instagram, all that good stuff. And speaking of Instagram, if you're not following me on Instagram, I would really like to grow my presence there. So if you enjoy these and perhaps you haven't checked out my profile, please do. I post a lot of stories. Some are educational, some are simply funny, so I hear. And I also do Instagram TV videos, which I plan on doing more of. So, if you would follow me there and you would leave me some feedback, I would know that the IGTV videos are actually well received, and that would be another reason for me to do more of them. So I've rambled long enough. Thank you, and I will see you all next week.